Piramal कौन है, हम करते क्या हैं, what do we stand for and why we are trustworthy?
We have very recently launched Neeyat.
So last time when Neeyat was more stated, this time Neeyat is more demonstrated.
It's totally upside down.
Yeah.
So most people are self-employed, most bank customers are salaried. Don't like it, same here. And hopefully you'll like it.
Hi everyone, welcome to the latest episode of the Piramal Finance Podcast. Today we have Mr. Jairam Sridharan, MD of Piramal Finance. We have Mr. Arvind Iyer, Chief Marketing Officer of Piramal Finance. And today we're here to discuss our latest campaign. We have very recently launched Neeyat, Kaagaz se zyada Neeyat dekhte hain, second version. Jairam sir, we'll start with you. So you've always said we serve Bharat. Now Bharat has many connotations to it. How we see it is a community who has means to an income but doesn't necessarily have access to formal credit. Is there a reason we've chosen to kind of serve these people? And do you see Neeyat sort of becoming a persona of how Piramal Finance wants to do business?
Yeah. So, as in many things, this is half opportunistic in terms of where the big business opportunity lies, and half majburi. Right. So you have to do what you can do. As a non-bank, there are some things you cannot do. So somebody who's listening to this podcast might be some hi-fi AI coder working in Bangalore, working for some fancy new company. They are unlikely to consider Piramal as a potential service provider for them because they have tons of options and they are very well served by lenders. And for someone like us to go and try and serve them and say, please come and take a loan from me at 12%, 13%, 14% is silly because they are not going to want to do that. So that's the majburi part of it, which is that there are pockets of the market which are not accessible to you at all. But then there is the mazbuti part of our argument, which is that where is strength in the market? And turns out that strength in India is very much in the smaller markets. There was a time when the cities which are the big metros now were large but also the fastest growing parts of the market. That's how they became so big. They've all become these massive entities because they went through periods of explosive growth. But now that explosive growth has slowed, right? And this is not where you're seeing. Of course, by size, they are still the biggest markets. But in growth rate terms, this is not where the big growths are coming. The growth is coming in smaller markets. Especially when you look within smaller markets, so that's the Bharat part. Like, why Bharat? But within that as well, the type of customer makes a difference, right? It's very well known, for example, that amongst various districts in the country, like the one with the highest penetration of large luxury cars in India is like Ludhiana or something like. There are these, there are really rich people in smaller towns, right? But again, those rich people have fairly good number of options for them as well. लुधियाना के अमीरजादे को लोन देने के लिए बहुत लोग बैठे हैं. Who can we serve even in these smaller markets? We can serve people whom the rest of the country or the rest of the financial services sector is not as keen on serving. Here's an interesting and simple statistic for you. If you look at the lending book of banks, 80% of their customers are salaried customers. If you look at India's Labour Ministry statistics, 80% of people in the labour force in India are self-employed. It's totally upside down.
Yeah.
So most people are self-employed, most bank customers are salaried, which shows you that the self-employed customer has not as many people lining up to serve them. The guy who runs a small kirana shop, the guy who runs a small kapde ki dukaan, the guy who runs one small restaurant, one small dhaba, or has one taxi, one auto, rather than a fleet, and he uses that for his daily income. Those people are individuals. They are not full-fledged businesses. And unfortunately, serving them has not been a priority for formal financial services in India because it's hard to serve them. And we can talk more later on why, but it's hard to serve them. And there is bigger, easier fish to fry for much of the market. So for us, this fact that small towns are growing a lot, within that self-employed populations are not being served as well by their sector compared to the salaried segment of the market, coupled with our own limitations as an NBFC, a AA rated NBFC as opposed to a AAA rated bank. All these things come together to form this target segment for us, what we call the budget customer of Bharat.
Very interesting. So Arvind, keeping this in mind, now we launched Neeyat in Jan of 2023. We've transitioned from that to Neeyat in October 2024. Can you help us sort of understand what that transition has been and how are we looking at the two very differently, even as Piramal as a brand?
So I'll actually take a leaf from what Jairam was explaining a little while ago, which is that so you got the banking fraternity serving the 20% of people of the country, which is essentially salaried, and you got self-employed, which is a very large 80% who don't have access to any form of formal credit, or at least not at scale. Now what we wanted to do is we said that let's figure out a way to be able to reach out to this population and tell them that hey, we want to be able to do something for you. But when you look at it, you want to be able to get a certain kind of customer to walk in through your door. Because and I'll take Jairam's words again. He told me once, and it was very profound. He says, we have a product for everyone, but not everyone may get it. So in being mindful of that, I think, and in the way we do business, which is the way we help select whether a customer should be given a certain amount of loan and what the terms should be, actually comes a lot out of assessing the individual, as opposed, because there is only so much paperwork that you can assess them for, right? So because of that, in a way, while it exists as a business model, I think the articulation of that being कि हम कागज से ज़्यादा नियत देखते हैं, because हम वही करते हैं, हम मार्केट में जाके ये असेस करने की कोशिश करते हैं कि कस्टमर का जो बिजनेस है या जो वो जहाँ पर वो एम्प्लॉयड हैं वहाँ पे does he or she have the ways and means to be able to make a steady income and be able to kind of repay it back. And we wanted to be able to bring it alive in the form of stories of Neeyat. So we said, let's do that. As a brand, let's announce ourselves saying that कि हम देख रहे हैं, the fact that we look beyond paperwork is something that we wanted to make super clear and evident. And that's what we did with Neeyat-Driven. And in that, what we did is we celebrated this whole aspect of somebody's Neeyat, where, either it's that family who's in that, reigning house, who's saying कि यार जो भी हो जाए मैं भैया के पैसे को हाथ नहीं लगाऊंगा, वो उनके हैं. तो it's in a way he's saying कि उसका नियत साफ है. Or for that matter, in the case of the Lohar, where our executive goes and says कि सर हमने पता किया कि आपने जिससे भी लोन लिया है या कोई भी उधारी लिया है आपने हमेशा चुकाया है, right? So in a way we wanted to showcase the fact that there is real niyat that exists in Bharat, in the tier 2 and 3 cities of this country, and that's what we wanted to celebrate. And the fact that Piramal Finance is a lender who cares with empathy and fairness, we want to be able to get people like them to come through the door. So that was Neeyat 1. But when it came to Neeyat 2, we said, can we dimension this a little further? So one is, of course, I mean, there is a ton of data, you're aware, where we know what's the kind of awareness we've got and what are people saying about us, what are they attributing us for. So it's fine. We made I wouldn't say very large progress, but we've made reasonably good progress on being able to say that we are a lender that cares. And you hear that when you go out in the market, you kind of hear people say that ki haan, Piramal Finance is generally helpful and very problem solving like. So that's the kind of verbiage you get to hear from the market. Now we said that if there is something that can actually bring this alive, and at the same time also within this customer, because you're still talking to 80% of a population who doesn't get access to funds. You're talking to कितने मतलब 300 million odd people. ठीक है, इनको आपको बताना है कि हम आपके लिए कुछ कर सकते हैं, and you want to show the kind of person who you want to talk to. So last time when Neeyat was more stated, this time Neeyat is more demonstrated. So whether it is the गन्ने वाली auntie who gives a gesture कि है ना, आप अगर मैं थोड़ा बर्फ पहले डाल दूंगी तो आपका जूस जो है वो कम हो जाएगा. So here Neeyat is more demonstrated. Or in case of the rickshaw wala, when he stops for his gas, and by the way, it's a very common thing, right? Stopping for gas is a very common thing. It also shows the fact that the guy is busy. He's running his rig all the time. So, but for the fact that he put his meter halfway and he said, "मेरा काम के लिए आपको क्यों पैसे देने हैं?" So that is more a demonstration of niyat. It's not like somebody actually saying कि देखो इसका niyat साफ है. So I think that's what we wanted to bring alive. And secondly, the dimension we wanted to add is, and that's another thing that even Jairam will be able to tell you. When we meet a lot of the customers, we did find out that एक form of एक self selection सा हो जाता है. I wouldn't say more. I think Jairam explains it better than I do, so I'll leave it for him to do. But there is a sort of a self selection that happens with our customer, because for a long time they have not been served by any formal credit institution. So उनको लगता है कि उसको loan ही कौन देगा? He's not going to go and approach any bank or any financial institution, because he or she feels that that's not a place from where we can begin in the first place. So because of that self-selection, you have a large population of your customer base who is going to self-select and not come and approach you, and therefore you have to fight that inertia. Yeah. So we in a way had this job of saying, who is the kind of person who we are talking to, and secondly, we want you to do something about it, which is why we said, आइए बात करते हैं. So the whole aspect of showcasing Neeyat in a format that doesn't need you to spell out what Neeyat is, कि मतलब वो एक्शन में दिखना चाहिए कि वो जिस तरीके से पेश आते हैं in their day-to-day business, in how they are day-to-day, उसमें दिखता है. It's in the actions. One is that, and second is for them to be able to get out of the inertia saying that कि अगर आपके लिए लोन के लिए कुछ कागज ही कम हुए तो क्या हुआ, आइए बात तो करते हैं. So to be able to at least welcome them through the door, and we've seen that because this comes from real experiences of how we've experienced where customers, whether झिझक के कैसे भी करके वो मतलब they walk through the door. And they've spoken to us and they felt, oh my God, why didn't I do this before? So these are also stemming from from real stories that we've taken and we've heavily borrowed from. So in a way, I think it's so to summarize, Neeyat was more showcasing the way we do business, bringing that alive in formats of stories that are very relatable, and situations that you get to see and hear. And it's a very authentic representation of that. And while we did that, we wanted to make sure that we do somehow try and break the inertia of the person to be able to come and approach us. So that's the big difference between the two splits.
Yeah. So Arvind mentioned that Piramal Finance now comes across as a brand that cares, right? You travel the length and breadth of this country, going to all the branches, 500 odd branches that we now have. Have you seen a change in perception? Has our sales team told you that, acha, now Piramal is perceived as a brand that cares? Is that what the ground reality is when you are on your travels?
See, what does a brand do? What do we mean when we say that this brand makes a difference? At the very basic level, a brand generates a certain kind of first recognition and then a certain kind of emotion in a person, right? And the person is not consciously aware of it. They might react to it positively or negatively, but they might not even know it, that they are reacting to it that way. But all brands create, or certainly known brands do create, a certain reaction in our minds. What we had before was, before we started Neeyat, was we had the Piramal name, which has its own connotations because the Piramal family, as industrialists, as businessmen, have been in this country for a very long time, have served in many businesses, etc., and are famous in their own right. So call it celebrity, right? So we had that, but did we have a brand? Right, a brand meaning something that resonates with the consumer of a product. And evokes certain reactions about that product or service, right? We didn't. And what that meant is that our salesperson, when he's going out there trying to meet either customers or channel partners, etc., has to first explain to them कि भाई Piramal कौन है, हम करते क्या हैं, what do we stand for, and why we are trustworthy. That conversation where you have to first convince the other person that you are a legitimate counterparty for them to speak with is what the brand tackles. What the brand does is actually makes that conversation redundant. You say the name, and the name is already associated with a bunch of feelings and a series of ideas, and all that is taken as read. And now you can get to the discussion at hand. That's what the Neeyat conversations have done for us. It is very clear that since we have gone live January last year, our recognition in the market is much higher. All the research that we see in terms of spontaneous recall or in terms of consideration, you've gone from absolutely nothing spontaneous recall to, let's say, a double-digit number steadily on spontaneous recall, which in a very fragmented business like financial services is a very high level of recall to get to for a very young company. So we've gotten to steady spont recall levels of, let's say, 10, 12, 13, which I'm very happy with. What that means is that the customer knows you. There is strong name recognition. And correspondingly, there is very high level of consideration. The point that Arvind made about speaking to the customer about situations that they can identify with, that they can see themselves as part of, and framing that conversation in such a way that the customer feels कि हाँ यार ये मेरे type के लोग हैं. That drives that relatability, drives consideration, right? And that's what we have been able to do with Neeyat, the first round of campaigning so far, and what we hear from our teams is that, boss, it's so much easier to sell the product. It's so much easier to talk to customers about it because they know who we are and what we stand for. And in fact, what that does is it drives traffic inwards, right? Not just customers, but also partners. Partners reach out to you and say, आपका ad देखा बड़ा अच्छा लगा, हमको आपके साथ काम करना है. So that continues to be our story. As you know, we had a nice town hall earlier in the day today, and we saw people writing in from different corners of the country. People just writing in and spontaneously, without us asking anything, on totally different topics. We're having conversation. People are writing in and saying, "Hey, we have great ads, and customers love it, and my channel partners love it, and I'm so happy that we did this." That tells you that the jobs of our foot soldiers is becoming easier, right? And that's what we can do. Like us, kind of leadership teams, people sitting in central offices. Our job is to make the life of the foot soldier easier, and our job is to make them or help them do their jobs better, more efficiently. And the brand is just a really powerful weapon in the arsenal of that foot soldier.
And I think also it helps with trust, right? I think we did a study post our IPL campaign last year, where people just came outside our branch to just see that this branch existed, and they didn't even go inside. They just needed that assurity that हाँ ये brand है, ये मतलब कोई fraud नहीं होने वाला है इधर. Yeah. So, Arvind, when we initially launched Neeyat, I think a lot of times we got questions that अच्छा पर आप बोलते रहे हो, पर आप Neeyat quantify कैसे करोगे, इसको calculate कैसे करोगे? Do you feel that there's a slight risk as a marketer maybe of going out on basing your brand ethos on something like this? And do you feel the way, say, we've done it, right, through creative storytelling, it kind of helps mitigate that entire sort of perception maybe?
So there are two parts to this. One is, if you look at any category, right? So let's say in our case, we are a non-banking financial services company, and if you were to look at vis-a-vis what we do versus what, let's say, other players do, there are ways in which you can differentiate. So you could either create, and the classic 4 P's of marketing, you could be product, proposition, price, promotion, stuff like that. So in that, I think what we did is we chose proposition, and proposition again has a further, I think, nuance to it, saying that it could be a brand proposition, but also like what tends to happen is you tend to confuse, like let's say a brand proposition with a promise. So like a proposition could work very well for, let's say, a D2C kind of brand. So let's say a product of something that you're wearing, like a perfume, right? So it says that the fragrance is long lasting because it has A, B, C, D, E, whatever components in it. Now that becomes like a functional proposition for that brand. Whereas for us, here, like Jairam said, Piramal is the brand, right? At the end of the day, firstly, we went into the market as the family, and then we created a brand around it. So in a way, the corporate entity in itself is the brand. The brand is actually lived through the experiences of how people discover you at branches, how they speak to different personnel at the branches, people at the call center, whoever they are interacting with. Brands are lived through all of these experiences. So it became imperative that we said that if we are going to go out and say, and we had a great promise in the form of a story. I still remember when I joined, पहला मतलब एक हाथ महीना ही हुआ होगा जयराम के साथ when I was sitting, he said we underwrite people, not just papers. Because and this came out of just a conversation where he has quoted it a couple of times, but I kind of caught on to that because we felt that if that's the inherent way in which we do business, and that's the way in which we built this company, right? So we should be able to talk about this as our proposition itself. And Neeyat was hence born in that manner. And when and you remember this, you were there when we scoped out pretty much every other brand, and we looked at what people have said in messaging, looked at it over the last, I think, some 15-20 years. And one thing we discovered is that while everyone's trying to tell the customer what they're going to sell for them, or what product they have as an offering for them, not much has been said about who am I and what can I do for you.
Problem am I solving for you?
Yeah, or what problem am I solving for you? Yeah, I mean, everybody does that, but in our case, we had the challenge of saying who am I, because nobody knew us.
Yeah.
If you look at some of our peer group players, they've been there for the last 2 decades or even more perhaps. So it was lesser of a challenge for them at this stage. But imagine we are at the stage where they were 20 years ago. And we are trying to do the same job, which is trying to establish this organization in the first place. So in which case, lending on what we truthfully stand for. And here again, I think the inspiration has been a lot of the, kind of the new wave of D2C brands that came in pre-COVID and post-COVID with this whole, sort of the funding era that happened. There's so many D2C brands that started doing, some lasted, some didn't. But yaar, बहुत interesting काम करी है सब लोग. And if you look at what they did was they were forced to do a customer back design because उनका business model वही था. Because they could exist and be able to get more money purely on the basis of a customer back design. And when you marry what we found and with something like this, saying that why don't we actually look at a customer back thing and then apply it to what we are trying to do, that's when those stories are born. Saying that here is how we're doing business, but what it really means for you, right, is an important way in which we felt we should. So in that way, dimensionalizing Neeyat or being able to show Neeyat, I think in the format of a everyday story, I think that if you ask me even today, like the new sprint that we've done is still the more challenging thing. Because you're trying to kind of break down something that's a concept like saying ki, aapke actions dekhe and the intention you have. So you're trying to say a lot of things.
Yeah.
It's your intent, your overall, like, how true and fair you are. At the same time, you're doing well in life. So you're trying to connote a lot of this, and you're saying that you've got a solution for you. So you're packing in all of that into like this little 35-40 second piece, and you're trying to bring that alive. I think that's always going to remain challenging. Every time we have an evocative story to tell, we're going to be at a cusp where कि हमें वो वहाँ पर बैठ के लगेगा यार इसको करना कैसा चाहिए. हर बार it'll be a surprise, and I think that's the beauty of running this brand.
So when we started, I think we had the home loan and the MSME business loan as our sort of primary products. Ever since we've added the digital PL, used car loan against securities, and a whole sort of bouquet of products to kind of help the Bharat customer with every kind of credit need that they have. with, say, the last 2 quarters of the financial year now remaining, do we have anything in the pipeline ahead that could further sort of help Bharat?
Yeah. See, our product portfolio is going to reflect our customers' behaviors and their borrowing wallet. If you see what does a customer borrow for, the most common and largest borrowing item is to buy a house. That's the home loan. Then there are kind of business use cases to kind of borrow for their business, either by putting up a security, a place of residence or a place of work, or some other assets that you might have. So that's a use case you see. You also see a lot of consumption use cases. शादी करनी है, तीरथ पे जाना है, whatever. Like you see a lot of that use cases, for which a lot of the unsecured loans get used. So we have most of those covered now. We have business loans, we have personal loans, we have used car financing, you have home loans, LAP or loan against property loans, etc. There are a couple of things that we don't have, which the Indian consumer does tend to use, and increasingly in recent years has been doing a lot of. And so we will probably enter into some of those business lines in the times to come. One of them is gold loans, because all Indians own gold, and very few Indians have monetized the gold that they have in their homes. But we do increasingly see that happening, and we do increasingly see people trying to monetize the gold they have in their house. So we will probably do a little bit of that, the gold loans business. We are also not active today in the payments industry. Payments has exploded in India in the last 10 years. There's a lot of payment businesses. Most of them are unprofitable, but they exist. But there is, I mean, as somebody who spent a lot of my career, I've spent in the credit cards business, and I have a lot of, love is a strong word, but regard, let's say, for the business. It's a business I like. It's something that we would like to get into in some way. So we will do something in the co-branded credit cards sort of space as well, and kind of one rung smaller than our current customer base, where we are talking about tier 2, tier 3 customers, Bharat markets, etc. There is one rung smaller. There is even larger kind of base of even smaller customer use cases, which our microfinance segment serves really well. We don't have a strong presence there. We're not a big rural player. We are mostly a semi-urban player. But we do want to start doing some work in that area, that sort of more bottom of the pyramid work. So microfinance is another area of some interest to us. So you might see us do something in that market as well.
So can we promise another podcast when the credit cards come out?
Hey, let's certainly do that. Let's certainly do that. You can't stop me talking about that business. Yeah.
So Arvind, we have the Neeyat campaign live. I think cumulatively across platforms, we have over 1 million views on the videos that we have. So what next now? What do people look forward to? What's the next story that we're going to tell?
With every single customer I've met, I've always come back with a very evocative story. And it continues to kind of grasp you, and we tend to quote it, like, whether we are in a chai conversation here or maybe in a media interview, but it keeps coming back. And when I use some of the more traditional CPG D2C brand basis marketing, you'll notice that what tends to be a logical step once a brand talks about a functional proposition is to be able to show it in a format that it works, which is by way of the classical, customer testimonial. And while, you kind of do that, it's standard fare, you tend to do testimonials for your websites and other, kind of assets of yours where you're trying to, put stuff out like on social and stuff. But we said, hey, there is probably, this is a place where we could experiment a bit more. And what we wanted to do is to be able to break that, not the format per se. I mean, the format needs to exist because, like I said, brands are lived through a lot of stories. So another format of storytelling is probably best explained when it is A, unscripted, and B, is just long format where you have a customer telling a story, and we've done some experiments there, and I think it's looking very, very interesting because they are, again, it's you'll get to see what semi-urban India or small town India really is, challenges, tribulations of an individual or the family, what they go through, and how their stories emerge. So something interesting has come out, and I think that's the thing that we're going to put out next. And I personally feel this is something that that'll really travel well organically. When I say organically, it means कि यार बहुत लोग देखेंगे और share भी करेंगे. So I'm hoping that happens, and we'll just ask our viewers to stay tuned for that.
Yeah, let me just add to that thing, like this funda that an ad is the main form of communication between a brand and its target audience, means every second counts. You're trying to tell the story of somebody's life in 30 seconds.
Correct.
And which it is possible to do if something really dramatic is going on. But most of us, our lives are kind of boring. Like there is not something that dramatic going on. What are you going to say in 30 seconds that is going to make that's going to make it pop out? You give me 5 minutes and I can tell you some interesting things about myself, right? And you will realize that my life isn't as boring as it appears on surface, right? So for the really dramatic stuff, right, which can get caught in a highlight reel, a few seconds is enough, right? But for most of us and for most of our customers, their lives are just regular lives, but within those regular lives, they are doing some extraordinary things, and there is
moments.
There is a beauty and a grace, which is there in those lives, and there is not in one grand gesture, but in their everyday way of living and the way they conduct themselves. What shines across is kind of their sense of good intentions. That niyat, right, is not coming through one grand gesture, but by just the way they live their lives. To tell those stories, right, 30 seconds is not the right format, right? You're going to unnecessarily dramatize something, right? But give us 5-7 minutes, and maybe we can tell the story a little bit better.
Awesome. I don't think there's too much more I can add to that. So guys, there's going to be a part 2 of this podcast. Please make sure you tune in. Guys, before we wrap up, anything that you'd like to leave the audience with?
Yeah, I'd say do watch our ads. We've put in an honest amount of effort in actually showcasing real customer stories in a genuine and honest and empathetic way. And hopefully you like what Arvind and team has done. If you don't like it, blame him. And hopefully you'll like it. And of course, if you like this channel and what the great work Varun and others are doing, like and subscribe to the channel and keep watching our content. You will see some of the links on the ads, etc., in the comment section below. And like and subscribe, I guess.
Perfect.